Okay, our lesson today is on solving multi-step inequalities. Our essential question, how do we solve and graph multi-step inequalities? Now, make sure you have your essential question written down. And what I want you to be thinking about is that solving an inequality is no different than solving an equation. And I want to make sure we understand. Here is an example of just a basic inequality. X is greater than 3. The only difference between an equation and an inequality is we have an inequality symbol instead of an equal sign. Now, our steps to solve, remember that we learned the little saying, don't call me after midnight, when we solve the multi-step equations. And so basically our steps are the same exact thing here. So that's 5 steps. I only have 3 listed, but we'll kind of go through that. So remember, the first step is to simplify. And so that involves our don't and our call. We need to distribute if the distributive property applies, if we have parentheses. And we need to combine like terms if we have any like terms. We don't always have that, but these are always the first things that we need to look for. Okay. Remember the M, the me, the move stands for move the variables. Remember, you can do this step and the next step a little bit out of order, but this is the way that I suggest. Move the variables to the same side. And remember, we always do this by adding or subtracting. The A and the M are the next 2 steps. Remember, we're then going to add or subtract our constant, and that's the step that you can switch with moving the variables. And the last step is then to multiply or divide, depending on how we need to cancel out our coefficient. Now, one thing to think about with inequalities is we do have to write our solution with an inequality, and there is something very special we have to remember about it. If we multiply or divide, which would be this step right here, by a negative number, if we multiply or divide by a negative number, we have to flip the inequality symbol. And I'm going to show you what I mean in a minute. We have to flip the inequality symbol. Okay? Let's look at an example of that to the side. If I say negative 2x is greater than 8, to solve that inequality, we would simply divide by negative 2. Well, we're dividing by a negative, so our special rule says we have to flip our inequality symbol. And so instead of being x is greater than negative 4, it's actually x is less than negative 4. And what I want you to think about is why. Why is this the case? What is an example that would explain the why we have to do that? And so we're going to talk about that in class, so be thinking about that. When we graph a one variable inequality, we graph it on a number line. And there's 2 things that we have to remember. First of all, we have to shade our number line, so we have to think about which way to shade. And we have to put a point on our circle. If our inequality symbol is a greater than or less than sign, remember we put an open circle. If our inequality symbol has the equal to in it, we put a closed circle to show that it can be that actual number. Okay, so let's look at the first example and let's work through our steps. In number 1, we don't have any parentheses. We don't have any like terms. This is just a basic 2-step inequality. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the add or subtract phase of our constant. So we're going to say minus 8 This gives me negative 3/5 x is less than or equal to 15. And so now to cancel out our fraction coefficient, it's negative 3/5, and so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal because that's the same thing as dividing by 3/5. So that will give me 1x over here.
Teachers and students, we now need all members of student council report to the library for the great picture. Again, all members of student council report to the library for their photo.
Sorry for the interruption. And so we're going to, I did some simplifying over here if you were watching. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. Now notice we multiplied both sides by a negative. So that means I have to switch my inequality symbol around. When we go to graph this, we're going to make a number line. All I care about is that you put the number from the solution in the middle and put at least one number bigger and one number smaller. This has equal to in it, so I would put a closed point. X is greater, so I am going to shade to the right. And so that is what my number line would look like. If you want to use a highlighter, that would be a great tool to use. Okay, let's look at number 2. We have parentheses, so we need to take care of the parentheses first. So negative 24c minus 12 is greater than negative 24c plus 6. Okay, let's combine like terms over here. 6 minus 24c. Okay, let's get our constants on the same side. So minus 6, negative 24c. Whoops. See, I chose to move my constant first, right? I didn't move the variables to the same side. And so at this point, then, we would add 24c. And we get 0 is greater than 0. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Is that true? Is 0 greater than 0? No, this is not true. Not true. And so if this is not true, if it's not possible, then we would say no solution. If I were going to graph this, it would just be an empty number line because the graph represents our solutions. Okay? I want you to skip to number 4. You can try number 3 on your own and see what you get. But let's skip to number 4. There's no parentheses. There are no like terms, so we're going to go straight to moving our variables to the same side. So 13k minus 7k is 6k. Okay, I'm then going to add 11 to both sides. 6k is less than 48. And then divide by 6. So the steps are no different than what we would do if we were solving an equation. And we get k is less than 8. So when I draw this graph, we have 8 in the middle, a number bigger, a number smaller. If k is less than 8, we're going to put an open circle because 8 cannot be a solution. So we're saying don't include the 8. And then we would shade everything to the left. Okay. Write down any questions that you might have, and we will look at some more examples in class.